The valley ended abruptly, dropping into a basin of jagged stone and shadow. Daniel, Maya, and Adam stopped. Before them, the whispering mountain rose, its base anchored in deep earth, its peak lost to a churning gray mist that seemed to swallow the light.
The wind did not whistle here. It moved through the crags with a low, vibrating thrum that echoed in the marrow of their bones.
Adam stepped forward, boots sliding on loose gravel, his eyes tracing the vertical expanse of rock that stretched until it vanished into the clouds. Maya knelt, pressing her palm against a flat, cold boulder at the edge of the drop, feeling the mountain pulse beneath the surface. Daniel stood between them, his gaze fixed on the summit. The air tasted of static and ancient dust. No birds circled the crags. No movement stirred the slopes. The mountain was not just a landmark. It was an obstruction, a monolith that blocked the horizon and silenced the world around it. They stood still, three small figures against a wall of stone, realizing that the path ahead was not merely difficult, but entirely uncharted. Daniel pulled the leather compass from his pocket. The brass casing felt unnaturally cold against his palm. He held it flat, waiting for the needle to settle, but the thin metal arm spun in frantic, erratic circles. It blurred into a silver ring, defying the pull of the north. He tilted his wrist, trying to force it still, but the needle jolted as if struck. Adam leaned in, his shadow falling over the device. He frowned, watching the needle suddenly jerk 90 degrees to the left,
pointing directly toward the heart of the mountain. The magnetic field here was not just distorted, it was violent.
Maya looked up from the ground, her eyes tracking the movement.
The air around them grew heavy, pressing against their chests with a sudden, localized pressure.
Daniel closed his fingers around the compass, but he could feel the needle vibrating through the casing, a rhythmic tapping against the brass. It was not broken. It was reacting.
The mountain was not just a pile of stone. It was a beacon, and the compass was screaming in response to a force that had no name.
They stood in the silence, watching the summit, waiting for the ground to answer. Maya moved away from the group, her boots crunching on the dry, brittle earth near the base of a sheer rock face. She stopped where the cliff curved inward, creating a natural alcove. Thick,
fibrous moss covered the stone like a matted carpet. She knelt, her fingers digging into the damp growth,
tearing away long, dark strips of vegetation. Beneath the debris, the stone was smooth, unnaturally flat, against the rugged cliff. She scraped the last of the grit away, revealing a seam in the rock.
Adam stepped closer, his camera raised, as Maya traced a series of jagged symbols etched into the surface.
They glowed with a faint, pale light that seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. She pressed her thumb directly into the center of the largest sigil. For a second, nothing happened.
Then, the ground beneath their feet dropped. A deep, tectonic groan vibrated through their boots, rattling their teeth. Dust billowed from the cliff as the stone door fractured, separating from the mountain wall. It did not swing open. It slid aside with a grinding metal-on-stone screech that echoed into the valley.
A dark, narrow void appeared, exhaling a sudden gust of stale, ancient air. They stepped over the threshold, moving from the open valley into the suffocating narrowness of the mountain. The transition was instant. The ambient heat of the sun vanished, replaced by a biting, metallic chill that seeped through their layers. The air tasted sharp and electric, thick with the scent of ozone. Adam clicked his flashlight on, the beam cutting through the gloom to reveal walls carved from polished, dark stone. They walked forward, their boots ringing out against the hard floor. Maya stopped, her hand hovering just inches from the surface of the wall. She traced the grooves of a mural that stretched into the shadows. The carvings were intricate, depicting human figures with their hands raised toward a glowing, geometric shape. A crystal. It was etched into the rock with precise, deliberate strokes, recurring every few feet along the passage. Daniel stopped to examine the detail, his fingers brushing the cold stone. The figures in the mural looked desperate, their postures strained, as if they were shielding the object from an unseen threat. The tunnel stretched deeper, the ceiling arching higher into the dark. Every step forward felt like moving further away from the world they knew. They pressed on, following the trail of the carvings, unaware of the silence closing in behind them. The tunnel narrowed, forcing them into a single file. Adam led, his headlamp casting a steady white cone against the uneven ceiling. Suddenly, the light stuttered. It pulsed twice, dimmed to a dull orange glow, and then cut out entirely. Behind him, Daniel and Maya tapped their own equipment, but the beams flickered in unison, struggling against an invisible interference.
The darkness did not just arrive, it hit them like a physical weight. The tunnel became an abyss. They stopped moving. The only sound was the rhythm of their own breathing and the distant, rhythmic dripping of water somewhere far ahead. Daniel reached out, his hand grasping for Adam's shoulder to ground himself. He found the fabric and gripped it. Maya moved closer, her back pressing against the cold, damp rock wall to orient herself. They stood frozen, waiting for their eyes to adjust. But the blackness remained absolute. A sense of vertigo set in as the ground beneath them seemed to shift. They stayed locked in place, listening for any movement in the dark, their hands searching for the walls or each other. Every nerve was strained, waiting for a sound that would tell them they were not alone in the mountain. The silence lasted until a faint rhythm began to pulse against the tunnel walls. It was not a sound,
but a vibration of light. A soft, cyan glow flickered near the floor, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the stone. Daniel took a cautious step forward, his boots sliding across smooth, polished rock. The blue luminescence intensified, bleeding from hairline cracks in the ceiling and tracing the veins of the earth. It was enough to see by. They moved forward, guided by the expanding radiance, until the tunnel opened abruptly. The cramped walls vanished. They stood on a high ledge, staring into a cavern of impossible scale. The ceiling was lost in shadows, but the floor below was bathed in an eerie, constant azure shimmer. Columns of rock rose like teeth from the depths, and the air here was thick with a static charge that made the hair on their arms stand up. It was a cathedral of stone, silent and ancient, waiting for them to descend. They stood at the brink of the descent, the vastness of the chamber swallowing the memory of the lightless tunnel behind them. The mountain had finally revealed its heart. They descended the ledge, their boots echoing against the stone floor. The chamber was unnaturally cold. In the center, a raised platform dominated the space, its surface smoothed to a mirror finish. 3 statues stood at equal intervals around the perimeter, each carved from granite and standing twice the height of a man. Their faces were weathered, features blurred by centuries of erosion, but their posture remained rigid. Daniel approached the platform first. At its core, resting on a pedestal of carved quartz, sat a golden compass. It did not catch the ambient blue light. It seemed to absorb it. Adam circled the platform, his gaze locked on the statues. As he moved, the shadows cast by the figures seemed to shift, following his path across the floor. They stopped at the edge of the dais, the weight of the silence pressing in. The compass needle was perfectly still, pointing toward the ceiling. They reached out, but hesitated, sensing that the statues were not merely decorative. The air around the platform hummed with a low frequency, a warning that the path ahead was blocked by more than just stone. They stood in the center of the chamber, trapped between the ancient guardians and the silent golden object. Maya knelt at the base of the platform, her palms pressing into the cold, dust-covered stone. She swept her hand in a wide arc, clearing away layers of fine grit that had settled over the floor for ages. Beneath the debris, deep grooves appeared, catching the blue luminescence of the chamber. She traced the lines with her index finger, her movements deliberate and steady. 3 distinct symbols emerged from the gloom.
Etched with precision into the floor tiles. Courage, wisdom, trust. She spoke the words aloud, her voice tight and barely audible against the oppressive stillness of the cavern.
Daniel looked down, his boots hovering inches from the carvings. He matched the symbols to the positions of the 3 statues looming over them. The connection was immediate. This was not a mere resting place for the compass. It was a mechanism designed to test them. Adam stopped scanning the statues and focused entirely on the floor. The air in the chamber grew dense, charged with a sudden, sharp pressure. They stood in a tight triangle, their eyes fixed on the carvings. The path forward was no longer a mystery, but a demand. Each symbol represented a gate, and they were the keys required to unlock it. Adam took a breath and stepped forward. His boot landed squarely on the symbol etched into the center of the floor. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a low vibration rippled through the soles of his feet, traveling upward through his legs. The stone beneath him shifted, sinking by a mere fraction of an inch. A deep, grinding sound resonated from deep within the foundation of the chamber, like boulders shifting under the weight of a mountain. The floor groaned, the sound echoing off the walls and vibrating in their chests. Dust cascaded from the ceiling, clouding the air as the massive statues above them seemed to lean inward. Adam held his ground, his weight centered on the carving, refusing to retreat. The floor plates began to slide, clicking into new positions with mechanical precision. The ground under their feet became unstable, tilting slightly. A hidden mechanism had been triggered, and there was no turning back. The chamber was waking up, responding to the pressure of his step. They braced themselves as the stone floor continued to shudder, the sound of grinding rock growing louder and more insistent with every passing second.
The grinding intensified until the entire floor lurched, forcing them to stagger. In front of them,
the chasm wall split open. Heavy slabs of rock slid outward, locking together to form a narrow bridge that spanned the dark gap. It was a bridge of solid stone, stretching toward the far ledge.
Adam moved first, his hand outstretched, but the moment he put his weight on the threshold,
the stone shivered. A hairline crack spiderwebbed across the center of the span. A sharp snap echoed through the chamber, loud as a pistol shot. The middle of the bridge simply gave way, turning into a cascade of rubble that vanished into the darkness below. Dust billowed up, stinging their eyes and coating their throats. The 2 remaining ends of the bridge hung uselessly over the void, jagged and disconnected. The path they had relied on was gone.
They stood at the very edge of the precipice, looking down into a depth that seemed to have no floor.
The mechanical humming died out, leaving only the sound of falling debris echoing in the deep.
They were trapped, separated from the exit by a gulf that no human could jump. Maya did not wait for the dust to settle. She pointed straight up, toward the shadowed ceiling where thick,
ancient ropes hung like vines in a storm. They were frayed,
twitching in a draft that shouldn't have existed. Adam looked at the gap, then at the rope nearest to him.
It was 10 feet away and swaying. He took a single step back, his boots digging into the loose gravel at the edge.
His muscles coiled. He launched himself into the void, arms stretched to their limit.
For a second, he was airborne, suspended over nothingness. His fingers brushed the hemp.
He missed. His momentum carried him forward, his hands clawing at the air. Then, his left hand hooked around the rope. The sudden jerk pulled his shoulder taut, his body slamming against the vertical rock face. His boots scraped the stone, sending sparks and pebbles spiraling into the dark. He swung wildly, the rope groaning under his weight, his legs dangling over the infinite drop.
He clamped his other hand onto the line, his breath coming in sharp,
ragged gasps. He was hanging, barely holding on, but he had cleared the first reach of the chasm.
Daniel watched Adam swing, the rope vibrating with a sickening metallic rasp against the stone ceiling.
The anchor point above was shifting, pulverized by years of tension.
He knew the hemp would not hold for 3. He grabbed his harness, pulling a steel carabiner from his belt with hands that refused to shake.
He looped his gear around the primary cord, the metal biting into the fiber,
and locked it tight. The ceiling groaned. A chunk of rock the size of a fist plummeted past him.
Daniel did not look down. He focused on the arc, calculated the trajectory,
and stepped into the open air. He swung hard, his weight pulling the rope taut against his anchor.
The line hummed, vibrating through his arms as he cleared the center of the chasm.
He felt the rope strain, the fibers popping one by one under the sudden load. He hit the far ledge,
rolled, and immediately braced his feet against the rock, pulling the rope back toward the center to create a steady tension.
He shouted back across the void, his voice echoing against the chamber walls.
The line was tight, a trembling bridge of steel and fiber held by his own strength.
Maya stood alone on the near side. The ledge beneath her boots was already shedding dust,
the stone crumbling into the abyss. She watched the rope, now taut as a bowstring, vibrating with the weight of the others. She reached up, her fingers locking onto the thick, dry fibers. Her knuckles turned white from the pressure. She stepped off the edge. The air rushed past her, cold and heavy with the scent of damp earth.
Halfway across, the rope shuddered. A sharp, rhythmic popping sound echoed through the chamber as the outer strands began to fray and snap, one by one. Maya felt the line slacken, then jerk violently downward. She pulled her knees to her chest, swinging her entire body into the momentum.
Her vision blurred as the far ledge loomed. She did not look down into the void. She focused entirely on the solid rock ahead. Her boots slammed into the edge of the ledge, her grip tightening until her hands burned. At that exact second, the rope behind her gave way with a final, echoing snap. The severed end whipped through the air like a lash, slapping against the stone where she had been a heartbeat before. She scrambled forward, hands clawing at the rock, until she was safe on solid ground. Maya did not stop to breathe. She scrambled up the incline, pulling herself alongside Daniel and Adam.
The air in the chamber suddenly shifted, pressure dropping as a low,
guttural vibration rose from deep within the stone floor. It started as a faint tremor in their boots, then escalated into a thunderous grind. Behind them, the tunnel ceiling began to fracture. Great slabs of rock, held in place for centuries, shifted and plummeted. The roar was absolute, a wall of sound that swallowed all other noise. Dust choked the air, thick and gray, turning the chamber into a blinded abyss. Daniel grabbed Adam by the shoulder, shoving him toward the far wall as a final, massive slab crashed down,
slamming shut the passage. The sound of the impact echoed for long seconds before dying into a heavy, suffocating silence. The exit was gone. A solid, impenetrable barrier of stone now stood where the tunnel had been. They were trapped. Maya wiped the grit from her face, her chest heaving, and turned toward the darkness ahead. Before them, a massive vault door stood waiting, its surface etched with deep, dormant channels. There was no going back. The only way forward was through. The vault door yielded with a long, agonizing moan of metal against stone. As it swung wide, the group stumbled into the vast chamber beyond. Thousands of crystals were embedded in the walls and ceiling, but the expected brilliance was nowhere to be found. Instead, a sickly, fading pulse emanated from them. The light was bleeding away, shifting from vibrant violet to a dull, lifeless gray. Every few seconds, another cluster of crystals went dark,
leaving pockets of shadow that seemed to swallow the room. The air was thin, smelling of ozone and stagnant dust.
Daniel moved first, his boots crunching on the debris as he waded toward the center of the room. He could hear a faint,
dying chime, like a glass bell shattering in slow motion. Adam followed,
his hand hovering over his camera, but finding no light left to capture. Maya stopped. watching a large crystalline formation above her head go completely opaque.
The mountain was starving. The life force that had sustained this place for centuries was evaporating into the dark.
They were not just explorers anymore. They were witnesses to a collapse. Daniel reached the central pedestal.
His breath hitching in his chest. He looked back at his friends. The cavern was dimming further, the shadows lengthening with every heartbeat. They had to act now, or the heart of the mountain would stop forever.
Daniel pulled the compass from his pack, his fingers trembling. He stepped up to the central pedestal and jammed the device into the circular slot. It clicked into place perfectly, flush with the stone surface.
He waited. He leaned in, listening for the hum of machinery or the spark of light. But the chamber remained silent.
The compass needle did not spin. It did not glow. It simply sat there. A useless piece of brass in a tomb of graying stone. Daniel slammed his fist against the pedestal.
The sound echoing harshly off the vault walls. Beside him, Maya watched in silence as the last cluster of crystals directly above them flickered and went black.
The darkness was closing in. Panic flared in his chest, a sharp, cold realization that they had arrived too late. They had risked everything, crossed the chasm,
and survived the collapse, only to find a dead machine. Adam moved to the edge of the platform, his flashlight beams sweeping over the surface. He stopped. He crouched low, brushing away a layer of fine, ancient dust. His eyes widened. He pointed to 3 distinct, hand-shaped indentations carved into the stone base, hidden beneath the pedestal rim. They were not meant for the compass alone. They were meant for them. Daniel looked at Maya and Adam. No words were needed. They stepped forward, positioning themselves around the pedestal. Daniel placed his right hand into the center groove, his palm sinking into the cold, worn stone. Maya followed, her fingers fitting perfectly into the left indentation. Adam took the right. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the platform hummed. A low-frequency vibration rattled their teeth and traveled up their arms. It felt like standing on the edge of an incoming storm. Suddenly, the grooves glowed white.
A blinding pulse of energy surged from their palms, rushing through the pedestal like liquid fire. The sound was deafening, a roar of displaced air and crackling static that filled the entire chamber.
The gray crystals on the walls caught the light and ignited. In an instant, the dim cavern shattered. The walls vanished, replaced by an infinite, shimmering expanse of starlight. They were no longer standing in a mountain vault. They were suspended in a void, surrounded by billions of points of light that pulsed in rhythm with their own hearts. The energy flowed through them, clearing the shadows, turning the dark tomb into a brilliant, star-filled universe. The transformation was absolute. The mountain had awakened. The light receded, leaving them blinking in the sudden clarity of the afternoon sun. They stepped out from the mountain base and stopped. The valley had been stripped of its gray, stagnant stillness.
Beneath their boots, the dry, cracked earth was now hidden under a thick carpet of vibrant blue flowers.
A soft breeze carried the scent of rain and damp soil. Daniel knelt, pressing his hand into the grass. It was cool and lush.
A few yards away, the silence of the valley was broken by the rhythmic roar of a river. Where a dry, stone-strewn path had been, a wide current of crystal-clear water now carved through the landscape.
Surging with life, Maya walked toward the bank,
watching as insects hovered over the surface and small birds darted through the air. The transformation was not just a restoration. It was an expansion of the mountain's hidden potential. Adam stood back, his camera hanging forgotten at his side, observing the horizon. The air felt thin and clean, stripped of the heavy pressure that had haunted them for days.
They looked at each other, seeing the same quiet understanding.
The mountain was no longer a cage of secrets. It was a source, and they were the ones who had unsealed it. Daniel pulled the compass from his pocket. The leather case was worn, but the metal casing remained cold and firm under his grip. He flipped the latch. The needle, which had spent days spinning in chaotic, frantic circles, suddenly snapped into place. It did not point north. It swung hard to the west, locking onto a distant, jagged silhouette of mountains that appeared as faint violet shadows against the horizon. Daniel looked up, his gaze meeting Maya's. She didn't ask questions. She simply nodded, her jaw set, her focus shifting from the ground beneath them to the path ahead. Adam packed his camera, sliding the lens cap into place with a sharp click. His hands were steady, the nervous energy of the climb replaced by a calm, focused intent. Nobody spoke. The mountain stood silent behind them, a monolith of stone that no longer held a claim on their future. They turned their backs to the peak. Their boots crunched against the fresh, damp grass as they took their first steps away from the valley. The needle held its course, pulling them toward the unknown. They walked with a synchronized, steady pace, leaving the sanctuary of the valley for the vast, uncharted range that waited in the distance.
Inside the cavern, the air had grown perfectly still. The echoes of the trio's departure had long since faded.
Leaving the massive chamber to its own rhythm, thousands of crystals remained dormant, dark and jagged against the rock walls. Yet, near the central pedestal, one final stone held a spark. It pulsed once, a soft, rhythmic beat of blue light that echoed the energy of the life restored outside. The glow traveled through the floor, casting long, shifting shadows across the platform where they had stood. Beneath this single, breathing crystal, the stone surface was worn smooth by time. There,
carved deep into the foundation of the mountain, 3 words caught the fading light. Adventure never ends.
the crystal pulsed again, brighter this time, a beacon waiting for the next hand to reach for it. Outside, the world was changing, but here, the secret remained perfectly preserved. The light slowed, matching the steady, heartbeat-like rhythm of the earth itself. It did not flicker out. It held its ground, a silent promise kept in the dark, signaling that the journey was not a conclusion, but a cycle. The cavern remained, a quiet vault of potential, waiting for the next chapter to begin.